Right, so you are welcome to session 11, transfer of learning. We're going to be discussing transfer of learning. So one thing we want to draw attention to is that we are studying learning and the procedures and the theories in learning, principles of learning, so that we'll be able to make use of what is learned by transferring skills and knowledge learned in one context to another. So this session is going to discuss transfer of learning as a topic and the various types of transfer that we have in psychology of learning. Then we'll look at how transfer of learning can be effective and also can be affected by interference and other factors. So we expect that at the end of the session, you students will be in a position to understand and explain what transfer of learning is and differentiate the various forms of transfer, interference, and transfer of learning. Be able to analyze factors that affect transfer of learning and explain the strategies for improving academic learning. So this will be very useful for yourself. And as usual, I expect you to really pay attention. We're going to have 4 topics in this session. So transfer of learning, transfer and interference, factors affecting transfer of learning, and strategies for improving academic learning. We're going to be doing this. So some relevant texts have been provided in Sakai for you to have a look at, to add to the stuff that you have. So let's look at the first topic, transfer of learning. What is transfer of learning? So what is transfer of learning? Transfer of learning is the application of skills and knowledge learned in one context applied to another context. That's what Kramer and Hardman 1987 said. When you apply the skills and knowledge that you've learned or you acquired in one context, apply it to another context, you are engaging in transfer of learning. And this is not new. It's not new because in our everyday life, prior learning is being transferred continuously to the development of new skills and knowledge in so many ways. For us to get the various types and forms, we'll start with near transfer. So near transfer, it usually involves tasks which are always applied in the same order. So with this one, previous transfer is previous knowledge is transferred to a new situation, closely similar to the previous situation. So with this one, the task is so similar that transfer of learning occurs easily and naturally. The other thing is that if circumstances change, a person is unable to adapt his or her skills and knowledge to that situation. An example we can give here is riding a bicycle, learning to ride a bicycle. So you keep your balance when you're riding a bicycle. And later, when you're going to learn how to ride a motorbike to keep your balance, you will find it relatively easier compared with if you didn't know how to ride a bicycle and hold your balance. Then we have far transfer. This is a situation where you apply learning to situations that are quite dissimilar to the previous situation. An example is transfer from school context to non-school context, such as learning economics in the school and using it in investment decisions. It is the environment that we're talking about here. Of course, when you learn economics, it will assist you get to understand investment and so on, and you'll be able to transfer your knowledge there. However, the environment in which you did your learning, if care is not taken, the school environment is different from where you're going to be working. There are 3 types of transfer. Generally, we can talk about three types of transfer. We have positive transfer, negative transfer, and zero transfer. So let's talk about positive transfer. Positive transfer. Positive transfer of learning occurs when learning on original task speeds up learning on the transfer task. So learning in one context improves learning on performance in another context. So we have negative transfer, on the other hand, occurs when previous learning or experience inhibits or interferes with learning or performance in a new context. So negatively influencing performance or learning in another context. In this case, learning on the original task slows down learning on the transfer task. It's an example of negative transfer. Then zero transfer is where one skill has no effect on the learning of another skill. So one situation does not affect the learning in another situation due to the similarity or no relationship between the stimulus and the response of the two situations. There is dissimilarity between the two situations. So a person's performance on one task may have no effect on the performance of another task. Can you think about an example? Think about it. Let's say your knowledge in maybe playing football, whether this can influence your knowledge and understanding of going to be a lawyer. I don't know how this relates. It has no effect. And the other way around, you being a lawyer, you already being a lawyer may not translate to you being skillful when it comes to playing football or singing. So they are not similar. The two situations are not similar, and so there will be a zero transfer in this situation. Now, there are 4 forms of transfer of learning. We have lateral transfer, we have sequential transfer, we have vertical transfer, and bilateral transfer, which we're going to be looking at. So the first one is lateral transfer, which is the most common form of transfer, where the understanding knowledge and skills specifically taught in school are employed by a person in learning situation outside the school. For instance, a child learns in school that 4 plus 4 is 8. So at home, he gathers 8 oranges and takes out 4 oranges and knows that he should have 4 oranges left. It's as simple as that. Lateral transfer. Then sequential transfer is learning at one level, facilitating new learning at a comparable level of behavior. For instance, an idea taught in school today has some relation to an idea to be taught tomorrow, and both will have some relationship with ideas taught in the next day. For instance, when you learn addition, it will help you when you come to be learning multiplication. So it's important to note here that both lateral and sequential transfer are forms of horizontal transfer, where the learner stays within the same level of difficulty in making transfer. Vertical transfer. This kind of transfer occurs when learning at one level facilitates learning at a higher level. Vertical. So from one level to the other level. So this one, old concepts or learning are used to learn or understand more complex concepts. So knowledge of a previous topic is essential to acquire new knowledge. This is vertical transfer. We have bilateral transfer. This one occurs when training imparted to one lateral automatically transfers to another lateral. For instance, for human beings, we have two lateral, that's right and left. Most people learn to write with their right hand, but sometimes we can also write with our left hands, only that it may not be as fast as the right hand. The same way, a soccer player may play football with his right leg, but he will be able to kick the ball with his left leg as well. So this bilateral transfer from one lateral to the other, from right to left or left to right, kind of. We have such kind of learning situations every then. So with that, we've come to the end of topic 1. We're now moving to topic 2. So topic 2, we want to look at transfer and interference. Transfer and interference. First, let's look at what interference is. So whatever you do as a person, what you do before and what you do after learning a material can interfere with the memory of what has been learned. So interference, when information impedes what you are trying to remember, which makes it less likely to remember what it is that we want to remember. This interference. We can discuss two main types: proactive interference and retroactive interference. Let's take a look at proactive interference, which into bracket forward acting. So proactive interference occurs when earlier learning disrupts memory of later learning, so that older items or information interferes with newer ones. So the more items a person has already learned previously, the more difficult it will be for recall of the newly learned items. So this is proactive interference. Let me explain that further with a diagram here. So this is an experiment used to explain how proactive interference works. So with this situation, you could see it from here. You could have the experimental group and the control group, which you are familiar with, experimental group and control group. So we have the study trials 1 and study trial 2, and then we have the test trials. That is where recall of the list is required, list B. So with the study trials, list A is given to the experimental group, let's study trial 1. The control group did not get anything here. Maybe that's why they are control group. That is it. So in study trial 2, we give another list to the experimental group. They already have read this one. They already have read this one. So this is the old item. This is the new item. The new item is given to both the control group and the experimental group. So when it comes to the test trial, they will be asked to recall list B. So both the experimental group and the control group will be asked to recall the list B. You can see that with the control group, they didn't learn anything for the study trial, so they don't have anything to interfere with their list B. So they are able to recall the list B very well. So they have a good recall of list B as compared with the poor recall of list B by the experimental group, because, what do we say? Because these items learned previously interferes with the recall of the current items, list B. is very understandable. So this diagram sums up the situation of proactive interference, where previously learned items come forward to interfere with the recall of new items. Now, let's move on to the next, which is retroactive interference. With this one, it's a situation which occurs when a later event or information learned interferes with recall of the previous or earlier information. So with this one, it's retroactive. New items learned, later items learned will go back to interfere with the item that you learned previously if you are trying to remember the items you learned previously. So similarly, we have a diagram to show here. So we have the same group, experimental group, and then control group. So we have the study trial 1 and study trial 2, and we have a test trial of list A. Test trial of list A is here. So with the experimental group, they are given the first list in study trial 1, and the control group is also given the first list of list A in study trial 1. In study trial 2, the experimental group is given the second list, which is list B, but the control group is not given any lists for list B. So when it comes to recall, with the test trial, the experimental group did poorly in recalling list A because the list B retroactively interferes with the recall of list A. So there is retroactive interference for the experimental group because they have 2 items that they've studied, and they're supposed to recall the first item, but the later items retroactively interferes, so they have poor recall. With the control group, they were given only the first item, they were not given the second item, so there is nothing to interfere with the recall of the second item, so they had a good recall of the list A, which is the item that they're supposed to recall. So that is it for the explanation for the retroactive interference compared with the proactive interference. So still on the types of interference, we have spontaneous recovery. Sometimes we use this term, spontaneous recovery, to help explain proactive interference. And it says that list A associations are extinguished only temporarily, and that they recover some of their strength as time passes by. Therefore, what it means is that when the experimental group is asked to recall list B, some of the item on list A associations return to interfere with the recall. So we call this spontaneous recovery. It's not that is forgotten, but it was just there lying low. But when it comes to points, they become activated and they recover spontaneously and starts to interfere with situations. Then we have extension and unlearning. Extension and unlearning. So it is easier to use extension or unlearning to explain retroactive inhibition. So in the experiment, the experimental group learns list A and then they learn list B. So as they are learning list B, list A becomes unlearned, so that a later test of list A shows poorer memory. So this is one of the ways to explain what happens with the retroactive and proactive interference. So now let's look at the next topic, which is factors that affect transfer of learning. there are several factors that affect transfer of learning. We will try explaining a few of them. So the first one is practice effects. So we have what is called distributed practice and also massed practice. Distributed practice is found to be more effective than massed practice because when a learner engages in distributed practice, what he's doing is that he's practicing several times, distributed several times. He or she is able to associate the information being learned with many different contexts. So the tendency is for the person to be able to remember and do a kind of a transfer for us. If the learner engages in massed practice, what information is learned all at once, that's why we call it massed. That information becomes associated with only a single context. Therefore, it becomes difficult to remember most of the things learned. That is why studies show that distributed practice is more effective than massed practice. Or to put it in your language, distributed learning is more effective than massed learning. So when you're going to learn, it's advisable to break your sessions into several contexts or sessions so that you'll be able to at least associate with several or many different contexts compared with massed learning, which will not help you. You'll be limited as to how many contexts you have. A single context, and once you forget about it, that is it. So that explains the practice effect. Then let's look at the next one, which is the interference effect. With this one, it occurs when previous or proactive or subsequent active learning interferes with the memory of the material of information to be recalled. So interference here could be proactive or retroactive. This can affect transfer. As we explained in the retroactive and the proactive transfer situations in the previous topic, this can affect transfer. If it becomes difficult to recall the material, then it becomes difficult to engage in transfer. Of course, because of interference, you can't recall. You learn one list earlier, you learn another one the second time. Then it comes to recalling the earlier one. Then what you learn later on interferes with the recall of the earlier item. It becomes difficult for you to remember how to apply the earlier item into the current situation. Maybe that's what you need. So that explains the interference effect. And the next one is warm-up effect. Warm-up is related to practice effect. It refers to the fact that practice done soon after learning the first list facilitates transfer more than if practice is delayed. So it's important that we look at this because studies have shown that if practice is done soon after learning the initial list, then the facilitating effects are larger. But this diminishes if the practice interval is increased. So here, a very good example is when you study something in a class, you have this lecture. Immediately after the lecture, it's important that you stay on, use the next 10-15 minutes after the class, go over it. You are able to understand, and if there are any issues you need to seek clarification on, you work on it faster than you delaying. It comes to a point where you will need to bring up or remember whatever you learned in the lecture. You will be able to work on it faster and better compared with when you delay. The next is meaningfulness of task. This can affect transfer of learning simply because when you learn something and it's rated high in terms of its meaningfulness to you, the person who learned the item, you are more likely to be able to remember these easily than when the items are not, or the item doesn't make any sense to you or makes less meaning to you. Of course, is simple for us because a farmer is able to relate well with fruits and items that he produces, compared with giving examples to a farmer using things that the person is not aware of. Inflation, computer, and so on and so forth. For the farmer, it will be more concerned if the items are related to the farm products, as an example. So a learner is able to organize the list of words and making learning and transfer easier because it gives meaning to the learner. Then the next item is task similarity. The similarity between the original task and transfer task is one main factor that influences the extent to which learning can be transferred. The greater the degree of similarity between the two tasks, the greater the amount of positive transfers obtained. So we mentioned this when we looked at positive transfers. It's important that when the task of what has been learned initially is similar to what is going to be learned on, it is very easy for there to be transfer compared with if there are no similarity. Then time interval between original task and then transfer task. So for effective transfer to take place, the time interval between the original task and the transfer task should not be long. It should be very short so that it will be very effective. The shorter the time interval between the two tasks, the easier it is for transfer of learning to take place, and vice versa. If the time interval is long, memory for the original task may decay, and this may make transfer difficult. Another factor that can affect, and which is the last point for this topic, is difficulty of task and transfer. If the original task is difficult to learn, transfer of learning becomes difficult as well. On the other hand, if the original task is easy to learn, but the transfer task is difficult, transfer of learning will again become difficult. So it's important that we consider these as factors that affect learning, transfer of learning. And that ends topic 3. Now let's go to the next topic, which is the last topic, topic 4, strategizing as a student to improve your academic learning. We've made this special topic for you, so it will help you as students in your various ways. We all have ways of studying, and we are different in so many ways, but it's been found that certain strategies are general and are able to, when applied, facilitate the students' learning behavior. So we want to see whether this can help in a way. So the first one is that reduce the material into manageable amounts. So one of the things you have to do when studying is to reduce the material you are studying into manageable amounts. So as a student, for each course, you are given lecture notes as well as reference to test books to read from. It's unlikely that you remember everything on every page of the lecture. So you need to summarize, put it together in a way that will be manageable. So you don't write everything and you can't remember everything as much as possible. So the next one is mass learning versus spaced learning. We mentioned this previously in a different way where we called it distributed and then massed practice. The same way here, as a student, do not wait until it is almost time for exams before you decide to start studying. Right from the beginning of the semester, you need to start studying so that you space out your learning throughout the semester and you'll be able to have several contexts to relate your studies, and also it will help minimize the pressure on you getting to revision time. So instead of waiting and trying to cram all down at the end of the semester in a very short period of time, it's important that you distribute, you space out your learning times. So this also goes to advise that the number of times you learn in a day should be broken into several pieces. If you have 6 hours free, you want to go and learn, it will be difficult for you to sit down for 6 hours without breaks. It's important to take breaks. maybe after every 30 minutes, you can get up for some 1 or 2 minutes. Come back, sit down, refresh, start again. You'll be able to pick up. So at the end of the 6 hours, you will learn so many things and you have so many breaks that will let you absorb more of what you learn compared with you sitting down at a stretch from minute 1 up to 6 hours. It will not help you. And also use recital and check recall. As you learn, repeat to yourself either silently or in writing, or you can even say it out loud, what you have learned. This will keep the processes of you keeping it or retaining whatever you learn, and will help you when it comes to exams. So one thing that has been observed is that recital helps you to implant memory for whatever information you are learning. That's what has been observed. This helps you to determine if you are effectively encoding material for easy retrieval, especially during exams and also when it comes to you going to work. The next and maybe last but one is the overlearning. It's not enough to learn the material you are studying. You need to overlearn it. And in fact, some authors even say there is nothing like overlearning. Learn and learn and learn all the time. Once you have learned material and you are able to retrieve it successfully, you will think that is enough and put the material away. Unfortunately, that is not the case. You may have to review the material again at least once or twice after you have mastered it. In other words, overlearn the material, and that will really help you as a student in your learning. Last but not the least on this session is space study sessions. We mentioned this and we are repeating it again. Some students prefer to sit for hours on end trying to study, but this is not an effective way to study. Space your study times or sessions instead of trying to learn a great deal of material all at once. For example, instead of sitting for 4 or 6 hours non-stop, have a break after every 2 hours. It makes learning more effective. It brings reports with minimal stress on yourself, and you are able to relate very well with the context in which you learn all this. I hope this will help you in your learning process as you move on to the next level and so on. So this is the end of the session. Let's prepare ourselves for the next session. Thank you very much.